Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In the heart of a modern African city, Kwame is a man on the edge. Trapped in a life of empty wealth and unfulfilled ambition, he seeks something more, something that will give him the power to control his destiny. But when a mysterious cult offers him a dark pact, promising unimaginable knowledge and influence in exchange for a simple price, he finds himself drawn into a web of ancient magic and betrayal. As Kwame's journey spirals into a nightmare of twisted secrets and disturbing truths, he must face a harrowing choice. What is he willing to sacrifice to break free from the cult's grip? And can he escape the dark magic before it consumes him entirely? Dark twists, shocking revelations, and edge-of-your-seat suspense await in this gripping tale of power, betrayal, and the cost of ambition. Subscribe, like, and follow for more epic stories. Share with friends who crave thrilling mysteries and dark magic. Kwame Amadi stood atop the glass tower of his penthouse, gazing down at the sprawling city of Kijani. The city, a vibrant pulse of life, stretched before him, a testament to his accomplishments. At only 32, Kwame had it all: wealth, influence, and the admiration of those who envied his meteoric rise. From luxury cars to designer suits, everything about him screamed success. But none of it filled the void inside. He had climbed to the top, yet, at night, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, haunted by the same emptiness. The parties, the women, the power, it all meant nothing now. No matter how much he attained, an unshakable feeling of dissatisfaction gnawed at his soul. One evening, after another business deal sealed, Kwame found himself walking through the old part of Kijani, a place long forgotten by the city's elite. As he wandered, he stumbled upon a small, dimly lit bookstore hidden in an alleyway. Something about it called to him, pulling him toward its entrance. Inside, the air was thick with dust and mystery. Shelves sagged under the weight of ancient texts, and in the far corner, an old man sat behind a counter, barely glancing up as Kwame entered. "Looking for something, son?" the man asked in a raspy voice. "I don't know," Kwame replied. "Something more." The old man's eyes glinted. "I have just the thing. But be warned, it's not for the faint of heart." He reached under the counter and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was untitled, its cover worn and weathered by time. As Kwame took it into his hands, the shiver ran down his spine. "This will give you what you seek," the man said, "but there is always a price." Kwame smiled, not taking the warning seriously. "I've paid every price to get where I am. I can handle it." The old man's smile faded as Kwame left the shop, the weight of the book heavy in his hand. Little did he know, the real cost of his desires was yet to be paid. That night, Kwame couldn't shake the book from his mind. Its presence was like a ghost haunting his every thought. He decided to open it, not expecting much, but what he found inside changed everything. The pages were filled with strange symbols and incantations, words that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of his study. As he read, the air in the room thickened, growing colder. His pulse quickened, his breath shallow. Something was happening. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the room, despite the windows being closed. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift and grow, and a voice, low and insidious, whispered in his ear. "You seek power beyond this world," it said. "I can give it to you." Kwame's heart raced. Who are you? The shadows swirled, coalescing into a dark figure that stood at the edge of the room. It was humanoid but shrouded in darkness, its features hidden. But its presence was undeniable, filling the room with a sense of dread. I am the answer to your prayers, Kwame Amadi, the figure said, its voice like nails on glass. I can give you knowledge, power, and pleasure beyond your wildest dreams. But you must agree to my terms. Kwame, though terrified, felt a strange exhilaration. He had always sought more power, more knowledge, more fulfillment. Was this his opportunity? The ultimate prize? What are the terms? Kwame asked, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. The figure smiled, a chilling sight. You will serve me, in time. But for now, enjoy the gifts I bestow. All you need to do is agree. Kwame hesitated for only a moment before nodding. I agree. And with those words, the figure disappeared, leaving Kwame alone in his dimly lit study. But something had changed. He could feel it, a dark force now coursing through him, something ancient and powerful. The pact was sealed. The next morning, Kwame woke up feeling different. It was as if the world had shifted overnight. The city of Kijani, which had always seemed so familiar, now appeared strange, its vibrancy muted by a dark undertone that only he could sense. At first, the changes were subtle. His senses had sharpened. He noticed things he never had before, the way people's eyes darted in fear, the tension in their voices, the hidden motivations behind every word spoken. It was as if the world had been stripped bare, revealing the darkness that lay beneath the surface. At work, Kwame's newfound power became evident. His business deals were more successful than ever. He could predict his competitors' moves before they made them, anticipate their weaknesses, and exploit them without mercy. He was no longer just wealthy, he was untouchable. But with this power came a growing hunger, a desire for more. Kwame felt it deep within him, an insatiable need that could not be quenched. He began dabbling in darker pursuits, seeking out ancient texts and forbidden rituals, delving deeper into the occult world that had opened up to him. One night, as he sat in his penthouse, studying a particularly dark passage from the mysterious book, he heard a voice again. It was the same voice as before, low and sinister, but this time it spoke with more urgency. The time is coming, Kwame. You must prepare. Kwame's heart raced. Prepare for what? The shadows in the room seemed to shift, growing thicker as the voice whispered, the balance will tip soon. And when it does, you must be ready to claim your place in the new order. The words sent a chill down Kwame's spine. He had thought this power would be his alone, but now it was clear there was something much larger at play. Something dark and unstoppable was coming, and he was a part of it. Kwame couldn't shake the chilling words from the voice. You must prepare. What did it mean? He had already gained power, wealth, and influence beyond his wildest dreams. So why did it feel like something worse was waiting for him? It started subtly. At work, his employees no longer dared to challenge him. His competitors began to tremble whenever they heard his name. But something changed within him. His hunger for success wasn't being satisfied. He needed more. That's when it started, his ability to see into the future, but not in a conventional way. It wasn't visions of grand events or massive fortunes, it was the little things, the conversations people would have hours before they happened, the deals that would fall apart the next day. It was as if he could manipulate time itself. Kwame knew he had to embrace this power. But the deeper he fell into it, the more his own mind became a battlefield. His thoughts were no longer his own. The voice, the dark presence, had returned, louder now, whispering promises of greater power. You must do as I say, it said. The world is your stage, Kwame. But you cannot have it all without making sacrifices. Kwame's palms were sweaty. What sacrifices? he whispered to the empty room, knowing full well he might not like the answer. The voice didn't answer right away. Then, like a creeping shadow, it spoke. Your soul. Kwame's heart skipped a beat. His soul. Was it worth all the power and wealth in the world? The thought of being consumed by darkness terrified him, but the allure of more power was irresistible. He was already deeper than he had ever imagined. His hands clenched into fists. He wasn't sure what was worse, the darkness consuming his soul, or the haunting idea that he had already crossed the point of no return. It was on a rainy night that Kwame found himself in an old, deserted part of the city, far from the sleek skyscrapers of Kijani. His phone buzzed in his hand, a message from a number he didn't recognize. It was an invitation. Meet me where the city forgets its past. The message chilled him to the bone. He knew the place. An old, abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city where no one dared go. His feet carried him there, guided by the whispers in his head. As he arrived, the factory loomed like a dark giant, its broken windows and rotting walls telling the tale of a forgotten history. Inside, the air was thick with decay. And there, in the shadows, stood the figure, the dark presence that had been haunting him. You're late, the figure said in a voice that echoed around the cold room. Kwame's throat tightened. What do you want from me? The figure stepped forward, its face still hidden by shadows, but its presence was undeniable, like a force pressing down on him. You've gained wealth and power, but you're not satisfied. You're hungry for something more. I can give it to you. Kwame shivered. What's the price? The price is always steep, the figure said. But this time, it's not your wealth or your status. It's your humanity. Kwame swallowed hard. The voice had spoken of sacrifices before, but he hadn't fully understood the cost. He was already lost in this dark world. Was there any chance to escape? Tell me what I must do, Kwame whispered, knowing deep down there would be no turning back. The figure smiled, its face still hidden. The darkness has already claimed you. You are the key to the next phase. But to truly claim your power, you must forsake what makes you human. The choice is yours, Kwame. But be careful, once you agree, there's no going back. Kwame's breath quickened. Was this really the price? His very soul, his humanity. Was it worth it? But as the figure spoke, he realized something. He had been given the chance to choose. And his ambition, his hunger for more, wouldn't let him say no. I agree, he said, his voice hoarse. The figure nodded. Then you will receive the gift you seek. As the darkness swallowed him whole, Kwame felt a strange sense of power surge through him. But with that power came a feeling of loss, as if something inside him had begun to decay. The next few days were a blur. Kwame's power grew exponentially. At work, deals that once seemed impossible were falling into place with ease. He could almost taste the victory before it even happened. He felt unstoppable. But the darkness that had been brewing inside him was now beginning to manifest. One afternoon, while alone in his penthouse, he began to hear whispers, voices from nowhere. At first, he thought it was his mind playing tricks on him, but then the voices grew louder, clearer. They were speaking to him. You belong to us now, the voice hissed. Kwame's skin crawled. He turned to look, but there was no one there. Just the same empty room, the same darkened corners. But the presence of the voices was real. It wasn't just in his head. They are waiting, the voice continued. The time has come for you to fulfill your destiny. Kwame's heart raced. This wasn't what he had imagined when he sought power. He had thought he could control it. He had thought he could control everything. But now, the unseen forces were pulling him in a direction he wasn't sure he wanted to go. His phone buzzed, breaking his spiraling thoughts. A text message. No number, just a cryptic message, meet me tonight or lose everything. For a moment, he hesitated. Who was this? What did they want? But deep down, he knew. The dark magic that had been gifted to him was pulling him into something deeper, something much darker than he had ever imagined. It was time to pay the price. Kwame's hands trembled as he stared at the message on his phone. Meet me tonight or lose everything. The words seemed to blur and twist in the dim light of his penthouse, but he knew there was no choice. The dark forces that had been silently working within him had come to a head. The sky outside was darkening as he prepared to leave. The city of Kijani, once vibrant and full of promise, now seemed like a cold, indifferent place. The streets, once bustling with life, felt deserted as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Kwame's mind was racing. Every deal, every step forward in his career had come at a cost. But he had never imagined the price would be this steep, his very soul, his humanity. And now, these unseen forces were pulling him toward something he couldn't fully understand. As he stepped out into the cold night, the streets seemed to close in around him. The buildings, once towering symbols of progress, now felt like they were leaning in, casting long, dark shadows over the city. He walked faster, his breath coming in shallow gusts, but it wasn't just the cold that made him shiver, it was the feeling that something was watching him. He arrived at the meeting place, an abandoned warehouse in the industrial part of the city. The place was shrouded in darkness, the air heavy with the scent of rust and decay. He could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on him, his heart pounding in his chest. Kwame, the voice echoed from the shadows. He couldn't see anyone, but the voice was unmistakable. It was the same voice that had been whispering to him since that fateful night. The voice that had promised him power beyond his wildest dreams. I've been waiting for you, it said again, the voice now closer, almost behind him. He spun around, but there was no one there. His skin crawled as he realized that the darkness wasn't just around him, it was inside him. Kwame felt a cold hand on his shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, the world around him seemed to blur. He was no longer in control. The dark presence had come to collect its due. You have made your choice, the voice whispered in his ear. And now, you will pay the price. He felt the weight of it all crash down on him. The darkness was real, and it was consuming him. But there was no turning back now. Kwame awoke with a start, his body drenched in cold sweat. He didn't need to look at the clock, he knew he hadn't slept for long. The dreams had returned, vivid and terrifying. Images of shadows chasing him, whispering his name. And that voice, always that voice. You have chosen, it had said. Now, sitting on the edge of his bed, the weight of his choices pressed down on him. Every part of his life was different since that night in the warehouse. People treated him with more respect, but they also feared him. His power was growing, but so was the darkness inside him. He stood up, his legs shaky, and went to the window. The city stretched out beneath him. Kijani, with its tall buildings and sprawling streets, was the same city he'd always known. But now, it felt alien, as if he no longer belonged. Kwame's phone buzzed. Another message from the unknown number. Tonight, you will see the full price of your deal. Be ready. He tried to shake off the unease that settled in his stomach, but he couldn't. His breath quickened. What did it mean? What would happen tonight? By the time evening came, Kwame was barely able to focus. He spent the day at work, his mind drifting. His colleagues whispered behind his back, casting uneasy glances his way. Some even crossed the street when they saw him walking toward them. The power he had craved so desperately was now a curse, and he was beginning to feel its weight. As dusk fell, Kwame found himself drawn back to the warehouse. It was almost as if the shadows were pulling him in, guiding him towards something he couldn't escape. When he stepped inside, the air was thick with a strange energy. There was no one there. Just silence, and the cold metal walls of the abandoned place. But as soon as Kwame entered, the air shifted. A figure emerged from the darkness. The figure that had haunted him since that night. "You know what you must do," the figure said, its voice like a low growl. Kwame nodded, though he didn't understand fully what he was agreeing to. He had come this far. What could one more step hurt? "Your soul is the final offering," the figure continued. "Only then will you be free to claim what is yours." He felt the darkness rising within him. The power, he could feel it now, like a pulse in his veins. But it came at a cost. The price was no longer abstract. It was his humanity. He had already lost it, little by little. There was no going back. The next few days passed in a haze for Kwame. His mind was a whirlwind of chaos, struggling to separate reality from the creeping darkness that seemed to consume him. He couldn't focus at work, and when he did, he made careless decisions. His once flawless sense of control was slipping. His relationships were falling apart, too. His friends no longer called, his family distanced themselves. They were scared of him. Scared of what he had become. The power he had craved so desperately had come with a price, but it was more than he could have ever imagined. Every step forward seemed to pull him further into a void where nothing felt real anymore. One evening, as he walked through the city, the cold air stinging his skin, Kwame stopped in front of a small shop. Its lights were dim, but a sign in the window caught his eye, "The Price of Truth." Curious, he walked inside. The air inside the shop was thick with incense. Shelves lined the walls, filled with strange artifacts, bones, candles, amulets. A woman stood behind the counter, her eyes sharp and penetrating. "I know why you've come," she said before he could speak. "You want to know the full cost of your pact." Kwame's stomach dropped. How did she know? Was she part of the cult? Or was this some sort of twisted game the darkness was playing on him? "What do you know about me?" Kwame asked, his voice low and tense. The woman smiled, a faint but knowing smile. "More than you can imagine. The darkness you've been given is not just power, it is a force that will consume everything you hold dear." Kwame felt his chest tighten. "What can I do to stop it?" "There's only one way," she said. "You must sacrifice what you most love." Kwame froze. Sacrifice what he loved. He had no idea what that would mean. What was left to lose? The woman's words echoed in Kwame's head for days. Sacrifice. What was it that he loved? What could possibly be worth the price of his soul? He tried to block it out, but it haunted him at work, at home, in his dreams. Every moment was filled with the unbearable weight of his choices. He stood on his balcony one evening, looking out over the city. The lights glittered like stars, but the city felt dead beneath them. The people, the bustling streets, the endless business deals, they all felt like a distant dream now. Kwame's phone buzzed again. Another message. "Tonight. The final choice is yours." He swallowed hard. The shadows had come for him once more. That night, he returned to the warehouse. This time, there was no waiting, no lingering in the darkness. As soon as he stepped inside, the air grew heavy with an almost tangible force. "You've come to face your destiny," the voice said. The figure emerged from the shadows, this time closer, its form almost solidifying before him. Kwame's heart pounded. He knew this was the moment. He could feel it in his bones. This was the price. The final step. "You have to choose, Kwame," the voice continued. "What will you sacrifice to maintain your power?" Kwame stood frozen, the cold air inside the warehouse wrapping around him like a suffocating cloak. The shadows that had once seemed distant now stretched toward him like fingers, pulling at his soul. The figure before him, a dark silhouette wrapped in mystery, loomed large, its presence filling the room. The voice echoed, deep and resonant, "You know what must be done." Kwame's heart raced. His breaths came shallow and fast. He had always been able to control his fate, his destiny. But now, he felt small and powerless, a puppet tangled in strings he couldn't see. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The figure's smile was chilling. "I want what you most cherish. Only then will you truly understand the price of your desires." Kwame's mind flashed to the few things that still felt real to him: his ambition, his career, his home, even the city he had grown to love. But there was something deeper. Something he hadn't fully realized until now. The figure's voice pierced through his thoughts. "You've become blind, Kwame. The one thing you love, the one thing that gives your life meaning, is already slipping from your grasp." Kwame's stomach clenched. The shadows danced around him, their forms flickering like flames in the wind. He realized then what it was: his connection to the world, his humanity, his ability to feel anything other than the emptiness that had started to consume him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. "You have only one choice. Choose carefully." The darkness was closing in, and he could feel the cold hand of fate wrapping around his chest. The following days were a blur. Kwame walked through the streets of Kijani like a ghost, disconnected from the world around him. His mind, once sharp and focused, now drifted in a sea of confusion and dread. People noticed. Colleagues whispered behind his back. The usual admiration he had received for his business acumen was now tinged with fear. They all sensed something was different. There was a coldness in his eyes, the depth of darkness that he couldn't shake. But the most disturbing part was his growing detachment. The things that once brought him joy, his job, his accomplishments, his wealth, now felt like empty shells, hollow and meaningless. He felt like a puppet, his strings pulled by forces beyond his control. That night, he received another message. "The time has come for your final decision. Tonight." Kwame didn't even hesitate. He knew where he had to go. The warehouse was as cold and imposing as before, but this time there was a sense of finality in the air. As he stepped inside, the shadows seemed to move with him, wrapping around him, whispering his name. The figure emerged from the darkness. Its eyes gleamed, and for the first time, Kwame could see the true form of his tormentor. It was neither human nor beast, but something older, more primal, made of pure darkness. "You've come to pay the price," the voice rumbled. "What will it be, Kwame?" Kwame felt a cold sweat break out on his skin. The figure was right. There was a price to be paid, and this was it. He had to choose his power or his humanity. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a physical force. He knew the answer even before the question had fully formed in his mind. "I'll sacrifice my power," he whispered, though his voice trembled. The figure laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that reverberated through the warehouse. "You think that will be enough to free you? You can never truly give up power once it has touched your soul." Suddenly, the world around him began to shift. The shadows grew darker, the air heavier. Kwame's knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, gasping for breath. His vision blurred, his chest tightening with every passing second. The dark force was overwhelming him, threatening to consume him whole. Kwame awoke in a cold sweat. His body felt heavy, like it had been weighed down by 1,000 pounds of iron. His head throbbed with pain, and for a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then it hit him: he was still in the warehouse, still trapped in this nightmare. The dark presence that had haunted him was close, its grip tightening around his heart. "Why didn't you let me go?" he groaned, his voice barely a whisper. The figure loomed over him, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. Its eyes gleamed red, its voice dark and cold. You think you can escape your fate so easily? Once you've made the pact, there's no turning back. Kwame tried to push himself up, but his body felt weak, almost as if it had been drained of energy. He could feel the darkness seeping into him, making his bones ache, his skin burn. You made a deal, Kwame, the figure continued, its voice low and sinister. A deal that you will pay for in ways you cannot imagine. Kwame's heart pounded in his chest. The darkness had taken everything from him, and now it was coming for his soul. He tried to resist, to fight back, but it was no use. The figure raised a hand, and the shadows began to swirl around him, enveloping him in a whirlwind of pain and terror. He could feel his body slowly disintegrating, piece by piece, as if the very essence of his being was being torn away. Kwame's eyes fluttered open, his body heavy as if he were sinking into the earth. A dull, aching pain radiated from his chest. For a moment, he thought he was still trapped in that cursed warehouse. But no, he was back in his apartment, the familiar walls and the faint hum of the city outside his window grounding him. Yet, everything felt different. The air seemed thicker, as if it carried the weight of something ancient and ominous. His skin felt prickly, like invisible fingers were brushing against him. He sat up slowly, sweat beading on his forehead, and stared at his reflection in the mirror. The face staring back at him was his, but there was something wrong with it. His eyes, once full of ambition and drive, were now dark, so dark that they seemed to swallow the light around him. His lips were drawn tight, and his skin had a faint pallor that wasn't there before. He stood up, unsteady on his feet, and staggered toward the window. The city of Kijani spread out before him, bustling with life, but everything felt distant, muted. He could hear the sound of children playing in the streets, cars honking, the typical noise of the vibrant city. But it felt like a world he no longer belonged to. And then, a voice echoed in his mind. You've taken what you wanted, but there is always a price. Now, you must pay. Kwame's pulse quickened. He spun around, but the room was empty. Only silence answered him. He clenched his fists, frustration welling up inside him. I made my choice, he said through gritted teeth. I gave up power. Why am I still being haunted by this darkness? But the truth was, he knew. The deal he had made wasn't just for power. It was for something deeper, his soul. And now, the darkness was clawing at him, taking hold, leaving him a shell of the man he once was. Is the darkness taking hold of Kwame? Join our final episode to find out.